Good evening, everybody. Welcome to a sort of end of day session. End of day means it's going to be slightly more informal than we would normally have, and this is the second of our hot health sort of topics, one a month, and with the idea that this is a place for interaction, to actually meet each other informally first. With food and some fluid, if you want. I was going to say alcohol, but I couldn't say that. But the purpose is actually to try and promote interdisciplinary thinking and working. And so we hope that there's a range of people here who will interact in an area that's actually of broad interest. The issue of mental health, especially with our young people, especially with the dramatic changes that we've had in the last 20 years around the use of our personal phones in particular, which is affecting everybody from our infants and babies, who we now see in video studies that I've been involved in, where a mother is breastfeeding a baby in bed at night, and all the time instead of looking at the baby, she is now looking at her cell phone and texting other people in the middle of the night when she's feeding, right through to adolescents who come into my clinic room and are always on their phone. I might talk to the mother, and occasionally I almost have to tempt the adolescents into, look, I've got a new game on my phone, have a look at this. And it's a depression rating app that allows me to get a look at their mental health in a medium that they actually understand more than I do. So we've got two people today, one a PhD student who's co-supervised in psychology and our own mental health department, and Damian Scarf, who comes from psychology, and I think they're going to do a duo. So we're going to start with Damian. Thank you very much for visiting us, and we're looking forward to hearing what you've got to say in this area.
Sweet. So, hello. I'm from psychology, so this isn't my neck of the woods. So I'm going to go over some of the work that colleagues in University of Queensland have been doing and that we've been doing here, looking at social identity and health. And so in the talk, I'm going to go over the background or the social identity and health of the approach that we take. Then I'm going to go over two examples. So one, looking at the application of this approach to depression in adults, and then another one looking at it in terms of resilience in youth. And so the basic idea around this approach is that we're part of lots of groups. So you might identify yourself as a parent, as you might see yourself also in the context of work, around your colleagues. You might play sport, and you also may be part of a rap group. And these are all the identities that you have. And rather than being something that's separate from us or separate from our own identity or our sense of self, these things actually inform who we are. So they become our identities. And the basic idea around the social identity approach to health, SIAH for short, is that these aren't just things that we have or things that don't matter. These have really important implications for mental health. So the groups that we're part of provide our lives with lots of different things. They provide our lives with meaning. They provide our lives with purpose. They provide our lives with positive interactions with others and people who view us positively. And all these things have really important implications for health. And so one way, I guess, to demonstrate this is, so this is from a large meta-analysis looking at the morbid topic of your odds of decreased mortality, so lower chances of dying, looking at lots of different predictors. And so one would be air. So this is air quality rather than breathing versus not breathing, because obviously that would take off many more years of life. BMI, so this is the one that we hear about a lot. Exercise is another one we hear about a lot. Drinking and smoking. But what the largest predictor was social connectedness. This doesn't mean every time I show this figure, people look at the social connectedness bar and think that they can add up, you know, being overweight, not exercising and drinking, then as long as they stay connected with other people, it will cancel out the bottom ones. But it's not additive, that's not how it works. But the basic point is that it matters much more than I guess most people think it matters. So when you go to the doctor rarely asks you about how many groups you belong to and how important they are to you. They usually just ask you whether you're eating healthy and exercising. So the point here is that maybe they should be asking about our groups. Maybe they should be asking whether we've got connections and whether there's people that we interact with on a daily basis in a meaningful way. And so when we think about social connectedness, and especially now with social media and things, there's lots of different ways, I guess, you could define it. And there's lots of different ways people do define it. And so one way would just be the size of your network. Another way would be how much contact you have. So whether you talk to the people in your network or how many people you talk to. And then the third one would be identification. So your subjective feelings about the group. And what we tend to find is that if you rank them in terms of importance and in terms of predictability of how well they predict health outcomes, that size of your social network actually predicts very little. Having 2,000 Facebook friends doesn't give you very much. Having contact with those people gives you a little bit more, but it still doesn't give you a great deal. What actually gives you the most is that sense of belonging and identity and acceptance that you feel with others. So if you think there's work with family and looking at contact with family versus identification with family, you know, those studies clearly show that it's not really contact that tells us the most. You know, you can have contact with your family without necessarily having interactions that are really helpful for our mental health. And of course, the flip side is that when you look at what's the largest, that most of the time, well, the biggest groups are the ones we have contact with. And we actually have very few connections, relatively speaking, that we identify with. And so here's all my Facebook friends, just to give an example. Each one represents one. And this represents the network between them. And so looking at this doesn't tell us much. So this would be a standard network size look. And this doesn't really tell us anything. It doesn't tell us what those connections are like, how often I contact those people, and how valuable those connections are to me. And so one approach to using this or implementing this is to give people a new identity, a new group, and see what impact that has on their mental health. And so one that does this really well is a company called Recklink in Australia. And basically they connect people looking for social groups to join. So there's lots of different groups. So the choir is one example, but they have arts and crafts group and groups that basically serve all different aspects of arts and sports. So for people who sports isn't a possibility, they have arts groups that they can join. And so this study looked at multiple different arts and cultural groups and people that are between 40 and 45, most of whom were in employment, and the majority of whom had a diagnosis of depression. And so they got referred to join one of these groups. And so they submitted them to the basic depression scale, so looking at whether they experience positive feelings, so feeling downhearted and blue, so rating these measures on a Likert scale, and then identification. And so identification here is how much they identify with the new group that they've joined. And so if we look, so 2 time points, and we split the sample into those who really identify with their social group, so they feel they're really accepted with the new group that they've joined, they feel that they belong with that group, and it's important to them. And we look at their depression scores over time, with the dotted line representing a cutoff. And what we find that if you have little identification with that group. So you're still connecting with these people, you're still hanging out with them, you're still going to the group, but you don't feel accepted by them. You don't see much of a change in depression scores. When you look at identification, so those who feel accepted by that group and feel they belong to that group, you see a clear decrease. And so again, this demonstrates that when we think about groups, contact is just one measure, and it's not a very helpful one. What we really want to know is how people feel about that group and how they feel others in the group see them. We can look at it also in the context of cognitive behavioral therapy, so a group-based approach. So this group is about the same age, but their diagnosis is slightly more serious. And so again, looking at whether in this context, so cognitive behavioral therapy in a group context, how the impact of that approach varies depending on how people feel about that group. And so again, we have a basic depression scale and a basic measure of identification. And we effectively find the same thing. So in this case, both groups show a decrease, but the decrease is markedly more for those who identify with their group. And so again, two contexts in which identification with the group rather than simply having contact with them shows the most explanatory value in terms of decreases in depression. Now we're going to switch to a different one. And speaking of social media, I'm going to talk about two SIAH training interventions for youth. So one is the spirit, and I guess what defines these things now more than ever is the fact that you don't get to take any technology on board. So more and more now it seems more difficult for youth, and there's more pressure, not just from youth to take their phones on, but also from parents. So parents not wanting to lose contact with their kids. They're so used to, I guess, being able to text them and phone them any time of the day that the idea of their kid going off into a boat into the middle of the ocean and then having contact with them, they find quite alarming. And so the first one I'm going to talk about is the Spirit, so the Spirit of New Zealand, so tracking kids who take part in this voyage. And a brief overview of the voyage, so day one, you have a group of youth who don't know one another, who turn up on the wharf looking uneasy at the fact that they have to talk to people that they've never seen before, which they find quite difficult. And then on that first day, you get a bunk room and you get assigned to your watch group. So this is the group that you're going to be in throughout the voyage, whether it's 2 o'clock in the morning on watch or whether it's a 6 o'clock in the morning swim. This is the group that you're going to be part of for the duration of the voyage. And the voyage unfolds in kind of a typical way. So the first couple of days, the crew take a hands-on policy with the kids. They go through a lot of cooperation and group exercises. Looking at building mastery in the kids, they have a transition where the crew starts to pull back and the youth start to take control of the ship. And then this culminates on day 9, where the kids are responsible for running the ship themselves. So they take care of everything, and the crew sits back unless it looks like they're going to crash. And then on day 10, they go back to the dock. And in contrast to the first day, where they didn't want to look up and talk to each other, on the last day, they can't leave each other. So on the last day, they're crying at the wharf at the idea that they have to leave. And they're usually extending the voyage somehow by going to like a local restaurant or something to sit down and have a meal. And so again, that demonstrates that within that 10 days, you go from a group of kids who can't look at one another to a group of kids who find it difficult to leave one another. And so the Spirit, in terms of demographics, they draw from around New Zealand. So the proportion in terms of ethnicity basically matches the national averages. And we look at resilience, and so resilience is very complex. It has lots of different factors, and so this scale taps lots of different things from basic ideas of self-discipline, keeping interested in things, questions about meaning, and questions about how they see themselves. And then looking at social support as a control, so a basic measure, and then identity. So whether they feel included and accepted, and that they're important, or the group is important to them. So we look, so time 1, a few months before the voyage, time 1, the first day, time 3, the last day, and time 4, 9 months after that. We compare the Spirit kids to a control group, and we get an increase in resilience from the first to the last day that's maintained 9 months after. If we look at identity, what predicts the maintenance of resilience is their identification with the group. So the voyage has long passed, and what predicts or maintains the resilience is the fact that they still feel they have an important group that they're part of, and an important group that they built a lot of skills around, that they overcame a lot of challenges with. And the question always is with this type of work is whether it's effective for everyone that takes part. So are the kids at the top who are already resilient just getting more resilient, or is it really tapping kids at all levels? And so we can do a basic moderation analysis and show that the kids who benefit the most from the new identity are those who start off the lowest in resilience. So it's not just the kids at the top getting better, it's the kids at the bottom coming up. The second one, so looking at a different population. So again, the Spirit selects kids who, although they're meant to be of different levels, for the most part, the Spirit's recruiting kids who are doing well at their school. And so the question always is whether it applies to other populations. And so there's a boat that runs out of Northland. So they draw kids exclusively from the Taito Tukara region up there. Only, I think, 1% come from outside of that region in terms of the kids that go on the voyage. And they're a very different group to the Spirit group. So in this one, the majority of kids that take part in the voyage are Māori, and they're also slightly younger than the kids who are on the Spirit, with the age range being a bit larger, so between kind of 13 to 18. In terms of economic status, they're also very different. So using decile as a proxy, this is the kids who are in the decile kind of 7 to 10 schools, the percentage, the middle decile schools, and then the lower decile schools. So you can see for the Māori youth that around 65% are in deciles 1 to 3. So if we're in Dunedin, we don't really know what decile 1 to 3 is because we don't necessarily have them here, but up there, they're very common. And that doesn't mean that the school is bad. It really just reflects the economic status of the neighbourhood. And so when working with this sample and using our approach, we also included a positive youth development approach. So we know that these kids could be categorized in terms of a range of risk factors, but I think it was really important for that voyage to look at it in a slightly different way. So in this way, we take some of the theories, so the Circle of Courage, which is from First Nations people in Canada, so again, and the overlap, I think, with social identity is clear, where they view things as belonging is really critical. And then a model that comes from a youth group in New Zealand, where again, we have multiple aspects of identity and belonging as central, and then aspects of growth outside of that. And so again, I guess somewhat different to normal positive youth development approaches, where identity is kind of one of many good things. With these models, identity is central. And that maps on really well to the social identity approach that we take. And so again, we have resilience measures, identity measures, and support measures. And again, splitting the sample, what we find is that before the voyage, the Māori kids are significantly lower, but by the end of the voyage, their levels are comparable to the New Zealand European kids. More importantly, when we split the sample by those who start off low and those who start off high, we see growth in both groups, but we see markedly more growth in the kids that start off low. And it's important when we think about resilience to not look at this data. I guess one concern when we look at data like this is that we say, well, maybe those kids just need to be more resilient. But that's not what the interpretation that we apply is. The better interpretation is how easy it is to influence the kids' resilience. How easy it is by giving them a group that accepts them and that cares about them and that's important, how easy it is to change it. So rather than looking at this and saying, well, if they were more resilient, they'd do better, I think the interpretation is of how, if we give them something and we give them a group, how easy it is for them to change. And that's it from me. So the pink theme is throughout my talk, wasn't my favorite color. It just reflects our pink shirt day that's coming up. So wear a pink shirt on May 18th, or if you're fashionable, you'll wear a salmon shirt, which I view or hear is more acceptable. So thank you. Yeah, I can take questions if anyone's got any.
Let's take this as questions now, and before we move on to the next topic. So, well, can I start the second study? Did you do a 9-month follow-up of that?
So no, so we haven't done, that was only just last year.
Right.
And we found that the kids the scales that we use, they actually need quite a bit of help filling them out.
Right.
So it's difficult with the spirit because we can just send the questionnaire and it'll go somewhere. And so with those kids, we're actually doing, we're going to work on qualitative work.
Okay.
So we're going to actually go and see the kids 9 months after.
Right.
And ask them about the voyage, and that way get narratives that might be a bit more informative and easy for them to kind of...
Right. Now, presumably you can have groups that take you in the other direction as well.
Yes, definitely. So, yeah.
Most parents know that who your children's friends are really critically important.
Yeah, it's true. If the groups are in the opposite direction, they have as much pull. You know, that groups... and I think that, especially in Northern, that's one of the things that happens is that lots of the groups up there are on the negative side. There's not many possibilities on the other. And so one of the terms that the youth use up there was, they termed it whānā, which is what they said they found out when you have nothing was the gains. And so again, that's, I think, the Tucker stuff, I think, demonstrates that if you give them the group, they'll latch onto that group and it will be important. But if you don't give them a group, then even if it's a bad group, they'll still
find a group.
Because I'd rather have a group than no.
Yep.
Okay, I've seen it. I was wondering what that was.
So based on your research, things such as social connectedness and peer support are really important. And yet in this region, there's maybe 5 peer support workers funded, and social connection is definitely not part of the medical model.
I think that's true. I mean, that's why you never really hear about it. I mean, the doctors, I guess, are the first in terms of what's salient in that area. And I think that is generally true, that diet and exercise are viewed as the most important when we know that connectedness is probably even more important. But I think that's slightly changing now. I think there's more movement towards realizing that connectedness is probably... Yeah. Yeah, there's very little. So the Tucker has to run a tourist operation during the summer just so they can build up enough money to run their youth operation in the winter. And so even up there, it's on a shoestring in terms of them continuing. Yeah, it doesn't really shift.
Thank you. There's another question up there.
Does this work? Oh, it does. Okay. I love this. The third question, where can I get this from? No.
Yeah, I think the question should be about that one.
Yeah, no. 2 quick questions. First one is, how high risk is the group strategy for resilience? If the group falls apart rapidly, do you find that the resilience levels tank?
So with both the Spirit and the Tucker, they put a great deal of effort into crafting the groups. So it's not just a random selection of kids, and especially with the Tucker, they're very cautious in terms of the range of kids that they have on board. So having kids from a range of abilities, I guess. And so we don't really see the groups fall apart. There was one voyage where the group did have issues, and you do basically see either a flat line in terms of gain or a negative. But for the most part, both the Spirit and the Tucker put considerable time, I guess, into making sure that the kids that come on board would complement each other.
Yeah, so if they're on hiatus, as the groups are at the end, basically, that idea of the group sticks with you. But if it does fall apart or doesn't properly form, no benefit or a negative benefit?
Yeah.
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 And the second thing is, size didn't seem to matter at all. It's the identity you have to the strength of your connections. But is there any measure of what it would be like if you're the kind of person that has a strong identity to having like 5,000 Facebook friends?
No, because identity is not, you can't identify with 5,000 Facebook friends, I guess, isn't really a group. Because a group really has connections between people within the group. So you thinking about having 5,000 Facebook friends isn't an identity.
Well, no, but okay, so I suppose it's for the people who make YouTube videos to millions of subscribers and they feel like they have that strong relationship to their audience, I suppose. Is that the same kind of thing? Can you have an audience connection like that?
I don't think so. I think that there has to be some interaction. There has to be some something beyond basically you supplying a product and them being happy with that product. You know, there's the bonds that they form on the voyage are more because they see them both in good times and bad. And so YouTube doesn't really reflect that. You don't make YouTube clips necessarily when you're sad most of the time. And then I also would argue that most of that, if you look at the comments on a YouTube clip, you probably get a mix of negatives that may detract from the positives.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. John, any catch? Well done.
Thank you, Damian. Is there any evidence that the kids on the voyage go out and create opportunities for other kids to be in groups or closer or get a sense of belonging? Is there an additive effect?
So that's what we're looking at now. And so the idea would be that that is what happens, that them having one group basically gives them the confidence. And for some kids, it's the first time that they've actually gone through that process of forming a group like that. And it's surprising, especially with the take, how few kids have the confidence that they can actually form those types of connections. And so the idea is that that gives them the confidence and that spills over into other groups, and that's something that hopefully we'll capture with the qualitative work, because it's really hard to capture that type of data in the way that we normally would with quantitative measures.
Because what you're really talking about is a cultural change.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that those kids then go out and then they hopefully recommend others take the voyage, but then they also kind of take the skills that they've learned in terms of building groups and confidence and apply it in the areas.
Because Erickson would say that culture is the way that you pass on identity. And so you're attempting, in a way, to change the basic culture, the way that things, Yeah,
and I think that the boat is a perfect place to build that culture. Because there's no other supports there. So removing their Facebook and everything else means that you have almost like this island where you can create a new culture. Hopefully that's what's
fabulous.
Thank you. I think that's a great place to stop, and thank you very much. And we'll move on to Jayde, who I think is going to be talking about some of her PhD studies.
Yes.
Welcome, and great to have the youth voice coming up too. Thank you very much.
Kia ora. Thanks for coming along. All right. So, people on their phones, am I right? When I talked to you about mindfulness meditation today, the image that probably comes to mind is something a little like this. Not this. But you really could be wrong. We often think that the only way to use technology mindfully is to turn it all off. But we live in a world where technology is fundamental to almost everything we do. Hands up who's used their phone in the last hour. Keep your hand raised if you used it in the last half an hour. 15 minutes. Who's using their phones right now? To paraphrase Rohan Gunatalaki, the way I see it is we cannot afford to continue to think of technology as being the enemy when it comes to health and well-being. Because our phones, tablets, watches and laptops can all move from being devices of distraction to devices of connection, both to ourselves and to others. But, to bastardize Jefferson, that doesn't mean all mobile health interventions are created equal. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. The ins and outs of whether mindfulness meditation can be delivered mobily to cultivate mental health and well-being in a student sample, and to discuss how much mindfulness you can really squeeze into a 10-minute session. So because I've only got 15 minutes for today's speed talk, I thought I'd give you a quick definition of mindfulness, tell you about the current direction of mindfulness research, and then maybe give you a short example of one of the studies that we've run at Otago. In the words of John Kabat-Zinn, mindfulness is paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. It's attending to experiences on a moment-to-moment basis in an effort to cultivate a non-judgmental, non-reactive state of awareness. And it's typified by practicing focused attention and open monitoring. So with focused attention, we're using a specific attentional object to focus intently on, often the breath. So if you look at our moving shape here, we can sync our breathing with its movement. And this is thought to help enhance our self-monitoring skills as we repeatedly return our attention to the designated object following inevitable distractions. Whereas open monitoring is a practice of a general awareness of experience without attachment to cognitive or emotional events. So instead of avoiding unwanted or uncomfortable experiences, mindfulness encourages practitioners to consciously engage with these experiences, attend to them, and ultimately observe their transitory nature, which is thought to ultimately lead to the alleviation rather than the exacerbation of suffering. And the popularity of mindfulness has skyrocketed in recent years. What was once practiced by few is now a commercialized, thriving industry, with mindfulness products ranging from coloring books and beauty products to treatment programs, company retreats, wearables, and apps. And this popularity spike has been accompanied by a rapid increase in research on the health benefits of mindfulness and mindfulness meditation, which in turn has been accompanied by policy support for the use of mindfulness all over the world. For example, in the UK, the NHS actually prescribes mindfulness as an option for their clients. But while there is a substantial body of research touting the benefits of mindfulness, this research is frequently made up of uncontrolled or inadequately controlled studies. They're frequently underpowered, short-term, or single-session pre-post studies, and they're actually quite prone to self-selection biases. So if you're familiar with the Gartner hype cycle, which is typically used in marketing to describe the pattern for new technologies, and has also comically been adapted to describe the lifespan of scientific research, the growing body of mindfulness research seems to fall about here. And over perhaps the last 2 years, mindfulness research has been teetering at the top of this peak. And researchers are beginning to take a more critical approach to delivering, assessing, and recommending mindfulness as a treatment option for mental health. They're also beginning to publish articles about potential negative effects of mindfulness, possible contraindications for mindfulness, publication biases in the research, and making stronger suggestions for how to conduct mindfulness research all over. And as of about a fortnight ago, I believe we actually have our first published null results. So this all suggests we're actually heading toward the trough of disillusionment. Concerningly, when we look at mindfulness meditation apps, many of the health benefits touted by these apps are based on mindfulness practice in general, rather than on app-based mindfulness. Given the fast-paced nature of the app industry and the inherent financial motives of this industry, there's a deficit in the empirical mobile mindfulness research. Despite there being over 1,300 mindfulness apps available in app stores, there are actually only a handful of published studies on mindfulness meditation, many of which suffer the same fatal flaws as previous research. In addition, the snail pace at which academic publishing occurs means that by the time a group of researchers actually published a review of mobile mindfulness research, all 5 of the evidence-supported apps were no longer available in the app stores. And it really is a shame, because apps have so much potential as both a health and well-being tool, but also as a research tool. App platforms really lend themselves well to critical evaluation, because the degree of standardization that can be achieved on an app far surpasses that which is available with face-to-face intervention. And smartphone use is only growing. If we look to New Zealand in particular, the majority of adults aged 18 to 34 own a smartphone, and they use it daily. If we look a little further abroad, smartphones are the preferred method of contact by young people. And this population is also less likely to seek or receive help for their mental health. If we look a little bit closer to home, 1/3 of a surveyed population of University of Otago students, I think it was 1,440 of us, scored above the threshold for significant symptoms of depression. So these factors all suggest that perhaps young adults might be an optimal population to trial mindfulness meditation. But the ultimate question is, if you put mobile mindfulness meditation under the magnifying glass, does it work? And given its deviation from a lifelong Buddhist practice, how much mindfulness can you really squeeze into a 10-minute session? I'm going to give you a bit of a spoiler alert. I can't actually give you an unequivocal answer on this one. We as researchers have to be extremely cautious about accepting the null or supporting the alternate hypotheses based on such a small number of trials. And we just don't have enough literature in mobile mindfulness to give you that answer. But what I can do is tell you a little bit about what we've been doing in this arena, how we're contributing to mobile mindfulness literature, and what we've found so far. So, to answer these questions, we asked 3 randomized groups of people to use one of 3 apps. Mindfulness App 1, which costs money after a brief free trial, an attention control app that was free but you could pay for extras, Mindfulness App 2, which is entirely free. We made sure to choose apps that had gained popularity. So App 1 has over 1 million users, and I believe App 2 has several 100,000 users. Because we really wanted the apps that were already relatively polished, mostly because I didn't want them to disappear off the App Store before I'd even managed to finish the trial. So we surveyed everyone at the outset of the study before asking them to complete a brief 10-minute session on their app every day for 10 days. During these 10 days, we sent them a text message every day at 7 p.m. with the URL to a brief daily survey. And after the 10-day trial, we asked them to complete a second survey before we gave them open access for another 30 days. So we really wanted to try and mimic a little bit more naturalistic use with this. And at each of these time points, we had several important measures that have featured heavily in previous research, including measures of depression, stress, anxiety, resilience, flourishing, and then, of course, mindfulness. And so what did we actually find? Well, first off, it's important to note that there was extremely high adherence during the 10-day trial. On average, people used their app on 9 out of those 10 days, but this really wasn't the case for the 30-day open access, where approximately half of all participants did not use their app a single time. Even so, these apps received pretty good acceptability ratings, which was a combination of perceived usefulness and effectiveness at each time point. And because we're interested in quite a few outcome measures, to most easily illustrate change over time, I'm just going to run you through some basic paired t-tests. So what we see here is that App 1 users showed improvements in symptoms of depression, stress, anxiety, mindfulness, and resilience with no change in flourishing across the first 10 days of the study. Our Mindfulness App 2 users also showed some improvements in depression and anxiety and resilience, but no changes in stress, mindfulness, and flourishing. And you'll notice that bar a small reduction in stress, the control app, who also self-reported very high usership, made no significant improvements in any of the categories and actually slightly worsened in depressive symptoms and flourishing. When we look from baseline to the end of the 40-day study, you'll see that App 1 users still show significant improvements in stress, anxiety, mindfulness, and resilience, despite the fact that over 40% of these users did not use the app during that 30 days, which I will also admit entirely broke my heart because I did spend the majority of my budget buying 1-month access codes for that study. App 2 users, by contrast, only show small improvements in reduction during that time period. And yet again, no significant improvement in any outcomes for the control group. So we wanted to look a little bit deeper, delve further to tear apart these relationships. And what did we find? Well, if we dummy code so that our control app is a comparator, we can see that both mindfulness app users report significantly lower depressive symptoms at time 2 compared to the control group. App 2 users report greater resilience, and only App 1 users report greater mindfulness. So, what gives? Both of these apps are actually presenting very, very samey mindfulness content. They're both focused on open monitoring and focused attention using mindful breathing and body scan meditation. So why are they showing such different outcomes? So I wanted to check that they actually were different from one another. And when I recode so that App 1 is our comparator, we do see that there is a significant difference in mindfulness between these two groups, but not at time 3. So I'm just going to jump back to the control group as a comparator and then look at our end of study outcomes. And what we see is that our 2 mindfulness app groups still show significant reductions in depression. One of our app groups shows improvements in anxiety, and the other shows improvements in resilience. And these improvements at time 3 are particularly impressive, given that almost half of these participants did not use the apps during this time at all, which leads me to my final fact. When we did some moderation analyses, we found that there was a bit of a dose-response relationship between mindfulness app use and mental health improvement. That is, those who use the app most frequently during the optional use phase reaped the greatest rewards in terms of their depression symptoms, anxiety, and mindfulness. So, where to from here? Well, as always, further research. But I'm particularly interested in exploring the mobile mindfulness and depression line a little further. We've recently completed a study with Student Health Services Counselling Service because I'm interested in the possibility that perhaps these could be used as homework tools in the counselling service as an adjunct to treatment as usual. And then the other area of interest is mindfulness and building resilience. So we have also recently conducted a large scale at Arana and Carrington, looking at building resilience when people first start university. So my take-home messages: I think mindfulness can be delivered mobily, and it may have some short-term benefits, but I don't think it's a magical band-aid, but it's definitely a good start, and I don't think that we should consider all technology to be a bad thing, especially because it's probably not going away. Thank you very much. And do you have any questions? No?
I will start again.
Sure.
Seeing nobody's jumping up and down. I mean, clearly there looks like there's a difference between app 1 and app 2.
Yes.
You must have used both of them. What was the difference?
Well, I've actually got a hang fire. So, we actually conducted a bunch of focus groups because we were like, what is going on here? So we invited all 210 people to take part in focus groups. We managed to get 7 focus groups in total. 5 of these groups were with mindfulness app users, and it represented about just over 15% of our overall sample. And we had several major questions that we wanted to understand. What did they think about it? Did they think it was useful? What were the barriers that stopped them? And what did they like and dislike? And then we wanted to look at how these differed between the between the apps. And so across the board, there was a resounding yes from all directions. Mobile mindfulness helped, but interestingly, that didn't relate to uptake. It was considered a good thing to do if you were feeling groggy or struggling to focus your mind, or your mind was racing a mile a minute. Participants felt that it helped with their studying to clear their heads or to help revitalize them so they could put in a few extra hours of study per day. It also really, this concept of conflict resolution through mood change came up multiple times with both groups. And then the barriers were social stigma and preconceptions and needing time and needing to add it into your routine and not having enough time for it, which was the same across both apps. This participant discussed how it's weird or creepy that you're alone in your room and some guy is talking to you. And participants who hadn't incorporated it into their routine felt like they just didn't have enough time for 6 minutes. But when they did do it, they didn't regret it. I think it's like a workout. You never regret it once you've done it, but you still can't be bothered to do it. So this is where the difference came. Looks, appearances, gamification, and technical difficulties. So despite everything my mother has told me while growing up, if there's one thing that I could take away from the series of focus groups that could apply to other app-based therapies, it's that looks really matter. App 1 was considered sleek and beautiful and easy to use. And unfortunately, the App 2, we got a lot of complaints about technical difficulties, glitchiness, appearance. Participant 3 above here wasn't even able to actually download the app onto their own personal phone and had to do it on somebody else's. So I think that it was app-specific differences, not... One participant actually said something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing, it's really hard to be mindful when your phone is pissing you off.
Okay, that's good. My second question will come very shortly was, did you, when they report using it, how many are using it in the middle of the night? You know, when in fact the app stuff itself may interfere with your sleep.
So not many are using it in the middle of the night, but lots are using it to go to sleep. Lots are using it to help them go to sleep.
Do they have to look at it then?
No, you don't look at it.
Okay. Okay, that answers my question. You had a question.
Oh.
Well done.
After your research, are you considering developing your own app?
No, because it's really hard. It takes a long time.
Stephen? Hatch?
Hey, looking at your, I'm interested in whether there were differences in your groups at baseline.
No, there wasn't.
So when you did your t-tests, there was no, the baseline measures were the same. I mean,
Yep.
I know you controlled for it in your regression.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all right. So basically the two groups are homogeneous more or less. When you
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's my only question.
Okay.
Great presentation.
There's another one over there. Oh, okay.
Hi, I'm a person who doesn't believe in technology almost at all.
That's fine.
And I don't actually understand why these people are so addicted to the phones myself. I don't know, and always want to throw their phones away. You are too addicted to the phones. Okay, my question is, these people, your participants, did they have this expectation that the technology will actually help them mentally? Did they have this expectation already in mind before they took on this research?
I believe so. By virtue of taking part in this study, it probably was a little bit implied, but that's why we had our control condition too. And the control condition was also, it's not the best of the control conditions, but a little bit of deception was involved, whereby participants were told that they were also trialing something that was potentially going to be good for them too.
Do you plan to do some other comparison, like ask them to at least go out for a walk to see the real world and to compare it with the effect from these applications?
Well, there is research in our lab that does that, but what we have done instead is, because we want to compare it to other mindfulness, we have also recently haven't done all of the analyses yet, but replicated this same study, but one of the conditions was an internet-based mindfulness, like on your computer rather than on the phone. I'd say another good but probably more difficult step would be to have like face-to-face group-based, but then we'd also have some sweet group social interaction affections.
Yeah, thank you very much, because for myself, going out for a walk is definitely more effective than using the phone.
Can you throw it over there, please?
Oh, that's really far.
Ooh.
Hi, just a question. You mentioned in the beginning of your talk that there's currently research that's being done that demonstrates a negative effect of mindfulness.
Yeah.
Could you give an example of something you think is credible?
There isn't a huge amount of this research actually published. There is an academic at Brown University who has been working on publishing this. It's mostly case studies at the moment. But I believe that there is a lot of evidence for contraindications for certain mental health diagnoses. Yeah.
Which mental health conditions?
Oh gosh. I believe that sometimes people with severe anxiety don't actually do very well with mindfulness.
I was thinking
And
that
then-
with OCD you might never stop. That's okay.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But then also I believe that there might be some contraindications for people that experience psychosis as well.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that would make sense.
Okay. Thank you. Another question
Actually-
here. And well caught.
This is outside your study, but I'm interested. You mentioned at the beginning about the age group that is reluctant, they're less likely to seek help.
Mm-hmm.
What are the reasons for that?
Oh, I don't know.
And because I'm interested in the idea of here one is interacting with, you know, the disembodied voice on the app.
Mm-hmm.
It's not relational, thinking about the social connection and identity that we heard about. Seems odd because I thought that young age group would more gravitate to human face-to-face type of help, particularly because there have been so many campaigns, John Kerwin and all making it okay.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't actually, I don't really know, but I would hazard the guess that convenience really factors into this, and then also the cost of accessing healthcare is a little bit prohibitive for some people, particularly younger people who don't typically earn that much money. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe the last question.
Pressure. I don't know if you'll be able to answer this one, but I am curious. Is there something that mindfulness is actually doing to make it easier to confront, like, you know, difficult problems and feel better about it? Or is it that you're just associating the problem with a peaceful state of mind compared to an anxious state of mind?
That's a difficult question because the state of the literature at the moment is kind of fighting over how they think mindfulness actually works.
Mm-hmm.
So when I gave the examples of open monitoring and focused attention, it's kind of in the same vein as a lot of CBT, the way CBT works, I think. Kind of like training yourself to let things go almost.
Okay, look, time is going. Some of us have to go home and join our social groups. So thank you very much to the two presenters. It's been a fascinating early evening meeting, and thank you both.